All right, so today we're diving into some really fascinating stuff from Michel Foucault.
Oh, yeah.
And, whether you're already a Foucault fan
Hmm.
or maybe this is your first time really encountering his work,
Right.
we've got a really interesting collection of his essays and interviews and lectures to kind of dig into.
Anthony.
And we're really going to focus on how he viewed art and literature,
Okay.
even madness,
Wow.
as like these windows into understanding the nature of thought itself.
What's really cool is how Foucault connects things that,
Yeah.
seem totally unrelated.
Right.
At first, he's got this amazing ability to see patterns
Yeah.
and make you see the world
Yeah.
in a whole new light.
I've got to admit, I was really drawn to this deep dive because of his work on this thing he calls the thought of the outside.
Oh, interesting.
It sounds kind of cryptic, doesn't it?
It does.
What exactly did he mean by that?
Well, imagine, going beyond the maps that you normally use to navigate the world, both physically and mentally.
Right.
Foucault argued that there's this whole realm of thought
Uh-huh.
that lies beyond our usual
Yeah.
logic and reason, a
Okay.
space where, like, the wild and chaotic,
Yeah.
unpredictable forces that actually shape our lives reside.
Okay, so I'm starting to get a sense of what he's getting at.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying, like, sometimes we need to ditch the maps and just explore the unknown?
Exactly. And he really saw artists and writers as explorers of this outside space.
Interesting.
He was really fascinated by artists like René Magritte, for example,
Oh, yeah.
whose paintings often play with our assumptions about language and reality.
I've always found Magritte's work a bit perplexing, especially that famous painting of a pipe with the caption, "This is not a pipe."
Right.
What was Foucault's take on that?
Well, he saw it as a brilliant example of how art can disrupt our comfortable relationship with language.
Mm.
The painting forces us to confront the fact that words and images don't always line up neatly. It's like Magritte is saying, hey, don't take language for granted. It's not a transparent window onto reality.
That's a great point. It's like that moment when you realize that the map isn't the territory.
Exactly.
So how does this idea of art disrupting language
Yeah.
connect to Foucault's broader work?
Well, Foucault believed that art,
Mm-hmm.
especially like avant-garde art and literature,
Okay.
could reveal the limitations and hidden power dynamics
Uh-huh.
of language itself.
Okay.
He was really interested in how language doesn't just describe reality,
Yeah.
but actually shapes our understanding of it.
So he's saying that language isn't neutral. It's
Exactly.
actually a tool that can be used
Yes.
to exert power and control.
Precisely. And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Foucault saw a strong connection between this linguistic rebellion in art
Okay.
and the way societies have historically treated those labeled as mad.
Wait, how do we get from avant-garde literature to madness?
Right.
That seems like a pretty big jump.
It might seem that way.
Yeah.
But Foucault was a master at drawing these connections
Okay.
between seemingly disparate things.
Right.
He argued that the way a society defines and treats madness
Yeah.
reveals a lot about its own anxieties,
Okay.
its power structures,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately its grip on what's considered normal.
So it's not just about mental illness as a medical condition.
Wow.
It's about how society uses that label
Exactly.
to enforce conformity.
You're getting it. And Foucault didn't just analyze this in a theoretical way.
Right.
He dove deep into historical examples.
Okay.
He compared how madness was treated in medieval Europe
Okay.
versus the rise of the asylum in the 17th century.
Okay, I'm curious,
Yeah.
how did those approaches to madness differ?
Well, in medieval Europe, people labeled as mad
Mm-hmm.
were often seen as possessing a kind of wisdom or insight.
Really?
They were seen as connected to something beyond the realm of ordinary understanding.
Wow.
But with the rise of, industrial society and the emphasis on reason and productivity,
Wow.
madness was increasingly seen as unproductive and disruptive.
So it sounds like the shift from a more agrarian society to a more industrialized one
Right.
brought about a major change in how madness was perceived.
Exactly. And with that shift came the rise of the asylum, a
Okay.
place to confine and control
Yeah.
those deemed mad.
Right.
Foucault saw this as a way of excluding certain voices and perspectives that didn't fit into the dominant worldview.
It's like society created a whole system to manage and control
Exactly.
those who didn't conform to the new definition of normal.
Exactly.
It's kind of disturbing when we think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
And Foucault's work really helps us see these power dynamics at play.
Right.
But he didn't stop there.
Okay.
He went on to argue that even art that seems to celebrate chaos and irrationality,
Okay.
like the work of avant-garde writers like Raymond Roussel,
Hmm.
can actually be a way of reinforcing the dominant order.
Now that's a twist. I was expecting him to say that this kind of art was purely subversive.
Yeah.
A way of, like, challenging the status quo.
Right. That's what's so brilliant about Foucault.
Yeah.
He constantly challenges our assumptions
Right.
and makes us think more deeply about this complex relationship
Yeah.
between art, language, power, and what we consider normal versus mad.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Mm-hmm.
But before we go any further,
Okay.
I think it's important to ground this discussion a bit more in Foucault's own words.
Sure.
I mean, who better to explain his ideas
Right.
than the man himself?
Absolutely. And luckily, the sources we have for this deep dive
Yeah.
include some really insightful interviews and lectures
Okay.
where Foucault reflects on his own work
Great.
and his influences.
Okay. I'm all ears.
Okay.
What kind of nuggets of wisdom did he drop about his intellectual journey?
Well, one thing that really stands out is Foucault's insistence that he wasn't trying to create a grand, overarching theory of everything. He saw himself as part of a critical tradition
Okay.
that aimed to understand the historical and social forces
Right.
that shape knowledge and power.
So instead of claiming to have all the answers,
Right.
he was more interested in raising questions and challenging assumptions.
Exactly.
So-
He wasn't interested in dictating what people should think,
Right.
but rather in providing them with the tools to think for themselves.
Yeah.
And that in itself is a powerful act of intellectual liberation.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it makes me even more curious to hear what he had to say about his own influences.
Sure.
Who were the thinkers who shaped his unique perspective?
Well, he often mentioned his admiration for philosophers like Nietzsche,
Oh.
Deleuze,
Mm-hmm.
and Bataille.
Okay.
All of these thinkers explored, the darker, less rational aspects of human experience
Right.
and challenged the idea of objective truth.
It sounds like Foucault was drawn to thinkers who weren't afraid to delve into the
Yes.
messy complexities of life and thought.
Absolutely. And that's what makes his work so relevant.
Yeah.
Even today,
Yeah.
he encourages us to question everything, to embrace uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
and to never stop seeking new ways of understanding ourselves and the world around us.
It's really striking how relevant his ideas are today,
Yeah.
especially in our current world where information overload is, like, constant. His emphasis on questioning assumptions
Right.
and really digging deeper
Yeah.
feels incredibly relevant.
Yeah. And speaking of digging deeper,
Yeah.
there's this one quote from Foucault that I think really captures his whole approach to knowledge.
Okay.
He said, "I am more intrigued by the existence of discourses, by the fact that words were spoken."
That's an interesting statement.
It is, yeah.
What do you think he meant by that?
Hmm.
It sounds like he's suggesting that the act of speaking itself,
Uh-huh.
of engaging in discourse, is somehow significant.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
Foucault was really skeptical of the idea that language is just a neutral tool for communication.
Okay.
He saw it as a force that actively shapes our reality, a force that can be used to both enlighten and control.
So it's not just what we say,
Right.
but how we say it.
Yes.
The context in which those words are spoken,
Exactly.
and even who gets to speak.
Absolutely. And this is where his idea of discourse comes in.
Okay.
For Foucault, a discourse isn't just like a conversation or a debate.
Right.
It's a whole system of knowledge, power, and social practices
Uh-huh.
that shapes how we think and talk about a particular subject.
To be honest, I'm still kind of grappling with this concept of discourse.
Mm-hmm.
It feels a bit abstract.
Yeah.
Can you give me, like, a concrete example of how this plays out in the real world?
Sure. Let's take the discourse around mental health,
Okay.
something we were discussing earlier.
Right.
It's not just about, like, the medical diagnosis of mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the whole network of social institutions,
Yeah.
laws, cultural beliefs, and even everyday conversations that define what's considered normal and abnormal behavior.
So it's like the discourse around mental health creates this whole system of power
Exactly.
that can label and control certain individuals and groups.
Uh-huh.
It dictates who gets listened to, who
Right.
gets treatment, and who gets marginalized.
Exactly. And Foucault's point is that this system of power isn't just oppressive,
Okay.
it's also productive.
Okay.
It creates categories, identities,
Mm-hmm.
and even forms of knowledge
Right.
that shape how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
This makes me think about all the different discourses operating in society today.
Yeah.
The discourses around gender, race, sexuality, even the discourse surrounding knowledge itself.
Right.
It's like these invisible forces that are constantly shaping our perceptions, experiences.
And what's crucial, as Foucault reminds us, is to become aware of these discourses, to analyze how they function, and to question their underlying assumptions. It's only by understanding how power and knowledge are intertwined that we can begin to challenge those discourses and create new possibilities for thought and action.
You know, this reminds me of another term Foucault used, archaeological history.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds kind of intimidating, to be honest.
Right.
What exactly did he mean by that?
It's actually a really insightful metaphor. Imagine an archaeologist carefully excavating the layers of an ancient city. Foucault saw himself as a kind of intellectual archaeologist, digging through the layers of history to uncover the hidden structures of thought that shape our understanding of the world.
So he wasn't just interested in what people thought in the past,
Right.
but in how those thoughts were made possible by the specific social, cultural, and even political conditions of their time.
Exactly. He was interested in uncovering the positivity of knowledge, the specific conditions that make certain forms of knowledge possible at particular historical moments.
Okay, that makes sense. So for Foucault, there's no such thing as a neutral, objective view of the world.
Yeah, he wasn't saying that reality doesn't exist, but rather that our access to reality is always mediated by language, by those discourses that shape our perceptions and interpretations.
It's like we're always looking at the world through a particular set of lenses.
Right.
And those lenses are shaped by the discourses we're immersed in.
Exactly.
Often without even realizing it.
Precisely. And Foucault's point is that we need to become aware of those lenses to understand how they shape our vision. And to consider the possibility of looking at the world through different lenses.
I'm starting to see how this all ties back to his fascination with art and literature.
Yeah.
It's like he saw artists and writers as those who can help us see the world through different lenses.
Exactly.
To challenge those dominant discourses that often go unquestioned.
You've got it. For Foucault, art had the power to disrupt those taken-for-granted ways of seeing and thinking. He saw it as a space where the limitations of language could be exposed and new possibilities for understanding could emerge.
This is all making me wonder, did Foucault believe that it's even possible to escape these discourses altogether?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that he really wrestled with throughout his work. He didn't believe in, like, some kind of pure, unmediated access to truth. But he did believe in the power of critical thinking, in the importance of questioning those dominant discourses that shape our reality.
So it's not about achieving some kind of ultimate objectivity, but about constantly challenging our own assumptions. And biases and being open to different perspectives.
Exactly. For Foucault, knowledge wasn't a static thing. It was a dynamic process. A constant struggle for understanding. And that struggle is what makes the pursuit of knowledge so vital and so fascinating.
I'm really starting to appreciate the depth and complexity of Foucault's thinking. But, you know, as much as I'm enjoying this intellectual exploration, I have to admit that I'm also feeling a bit overwhelmed.
I understand.
Like my brain is trying to stretch.
It is a lot to take in.
In all these new directions at once.
Yeah. Foucault's work can be challenging.
Yeah.
But that's also what makes it so rewarding.
Right.
He doesn't give us easy answers.
Yeah.
But rather encourages us to question, to analyze,
right,
and to think critically.
So instead of trying to absorb everything at once,
right,
maybe it's more about letting these ideas simmer
yeah,
and seeing how they connect to our own experiences and observations of the world.
That's a great approach.
Yeah.
Foucault's work isn't about memorizing facts or theories.
Right.
It's about developing a critical lens, a way of seeing the world that allows us to question those assumptions and power dynamics that often go unnoticed.
You know, one thing that's really resonating with me is this idea that knowledge isn't just about accumulating information.
Right.
It's about understanding how that information is constructed and who benefits from those constructions.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the power dynamics that shape what we know and how we know it.
And what's fascinating is that Foucault suggests that In our pursuit of knowledge,
Yeah.
we often end up sacrificing something crucial.
Oh.
The very subject who seeks to know.
Hmm.
In other words, the more we try to control and categorize the world, the more we risk losing sight of our own subjectivity,
Okay.
our own unique perspective on reality.
That's a profound point.
It is.
It's like he's saying that the quest for objective knowledge can sometimes lead to a kind of intellectual alienation.
Yeah.
We become so focused on analyzing and dissecting the world
Right.
that we forget about our own lived experience.
Exactly.
Our own unique way of being in the world.
Exactly. And that this raises a really important question.
Yeah.
What is the cost of knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to pursue knowledge
Right.
without sacrificing the richness and complexity of our own lived experience?
That's a question I'll definitely be pondering for a while.
Yeah, big one.
Yeah, it makes me think about the importance of balancing critical analysis
Right.
with a kind of openness to experience,
Mm.
a willingness to let go of our need to control and
Yeah.
categorize everything.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
I think Foucault would agree that finding that balance is essential.
Okay.
He wasn't advocating for a kind of radical subjectivity
Right.
where everyone's truth is equally valid.
I
He
know.
wasn't saying anything goes.
So it's not about rejecting reason and objectivity altogether,
Right.
but about recognizing the limitations of those approaches
Yes.
and finding a way to integrate them
Exactly.
with our own subjective experience.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Foucault so challenging
Right.
and so rewarding to engage with. He pushes us to think beyond those binary oppositions, to embrace the messiness and complexity
Yeah.
of both knowledge and lived experience.
You know, all this talk about the limitations of language and the power of discourse makes me wonder about something.
Yeah.
If language is so inherently flawed,
Yeah.
so susceptible to manipulation and distortion,
Right.
how can we ever hope to communicate effectively and
Yeah.
understand each other?
That's a really important question,
Yeah.
and one that goes to the heart of what it means to be human.
Right.
I think Foucault would say that while language is inherently limited, it's also the only tool we have
Yeah.
for making sense of the world and
Right.
connecting with others.
So it's like we're caught in this paradox. We need language to communicate and understand each other,
Yeah.
but we also need to be constantly aware of its limitations
Right.
and potential for manipulation.
Exactly. And that awareness,
Okay.
that critical stance toward language itself is what Foucault saw as essential for both individual
Yeah.
and societal liberation.
This is all so thought-provoking.
It is.
I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
You too.
But before we get too carried away,
Okay.
is there anything else from the source material you think is worth highlighting?
Yeah, there's one more point I think is really important.
Okay.
He argued that his approach, archaeological history,
Okay.
isn't a science,
All right.
but rather a way of uncovering the positivity of knowledge.
Wait, could you remind me what archaeological history means in this context?
Sure, it's like we were talking about before.
Okay.
Foucault likened himself to an archaeologist,
Right.
digging through the layers of history
Yeah.
to uncover the conditions that make certain forms of knowledge possible
Right.
at particular historical moments.
Right, like unearthing the foundations of knowledge,
Yeah,
revealing the hidden assumptions and power structures
exactly.
that underlie what we consider to be true.
Exactly. And by doing so, he challenges us to question the very idea of objective truth
Okay.
and recognize that knowledge is always situated, always embedded in a particular historical context.
This is making me think about the concept of episteme that Foucault talked about.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
It's like he's saying that there are these underlying structures of thought, these
Right.
epistemes
Right.
that shape what's considered knowledge
Exactly.
in a particular historical period.
You got it. And those epistemes aren't static.
Right.
They're constantly shifting and evolving.
Okay.
What's considered knowledge today might be seen as complete nonsense in 100 years.
Right.
And vice versa.
So it's like we're always operating within a particular episteme, a particular way of seeing the world,
Yes.
but we often don't even realize it.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these epistemic shifts,
Okay.
to understand how knowledge is constructed and contested, and to be open to the possibility that what we consider to be true today might not always be so.
It's almost like realizing that the ground beneath our feet is constantly shifting.
Yeah.
That the very foundation of what we know is always in flux.
Exactly.
That's a pretty dizzying thought.
It is, but it's also incredibly liberating. Okay. Once you recognize that knowledge is a dynamic process, a constant struggle for understanding,
right,
you become less attached to fixed truths.
Yeah.
And more open to new possibilities.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like embracing the uncertainty and constantly questioning the world around us.
Exactly.
It sounds like a recipe for a life of intellectual adventure.
And that's what Foucault was all about.
Yeah.
Encouraging us to become adventurers of the mind, to explore the uncharted territories of thought,
right,
and challenge those taken for granted assumptions that shape our reality.
Yeah, it really makes you realize that, like, truly understanding something, it involves so much more than just knowing the facts.
Right.
It's about, like, grappling with the context, the power dynamics,
Yep.
all the hidden assumptions that shape how we even see those facts in the first place.
And it's important to remember that Foucault wasn't saying, like, anything goes,
Right.
He wasn't dismissing evidence or critical thinking.
Yeah.
Instead, he was pushing us to be more rigorous in our analysis, to acknowledge our own limitations and the ways that power shapes what we consider to be true.
So it's not about rejecting reason altogether.
Right.
But about understanding that reason itself exists within a certain context. It's never truly neutral.
Exactly. And that's what makes his work so challenging.
Yeah.
But also so enriching.
Right.
It's not about finding easy answers.
Right.
But about developing this, like, critical lens, a way of questioning the world that helps us see those hidden dynamics and challenge the assumptions that we often just take for granted.
I think that's what I find so compelling about Foucault. It's not about giving us a set of doctrines to follow, but like a set of tools for thinking critically and engaging with the world in a more informed and nuanced way.
And those tools are, like, more important now than ever.
Right.
I mean, think about it. We're just bombarded with information constantly.
Yeah.
From all sides.
Right.
It's so easy to get overwhelmed and lose sight of the bigger picture.
For sure.
But Foucault's work gives us a framework for understanding how knowledge is produced, how it's circulated, and ultimately how it shapes us and our world.
I'm starting to see how all these different pieces of Foucault's thought fit together. The emphasis on discourse, the idea of archaeological history, the exploration of madness, and the thought of the outside.
Yeah, it's like he's giving us this map for navigating the complexities of knowledge, power, and thought itself.
And it's a map that requires us to be, like, active participants.
Yes.
Not just passive observers. He wants us to question, to analyze, to really dig deeper, and then, like, draw our own conclusions.
Absolutely.
I have to admit that diving into Foucault's work has been a bit of a mind-bending experience.
I can imagine.
But in a good way.
Right.
It's made me rethink a lot of my assumptions about knowledge, about truth, and about how I see the world.
That's the power of engaging with these kinds of ideas.
Yeah.
They can really shake us out of our complacency.
Right.
Make us see things in a new light.
Right.
And push us to think more critically.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
In this deep dive into Foucault's world. And, while I still have a lot to process and think about, I feel like I've gained some really valuable insights into this complex relationship between knowledge, power, and thinking itself.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Yeah, this has been great.
And to our listeners,
I
encourage you to keep exploring these ideas too.
Right.
Read Foucault. Engage with his ideas. And see where they take you on your own intellectual journey.
That's great advice. And, as Foucault reminds us, this pursuit of knowledge, it's not about finding the definitive answers.
Right.
It's about embracing this ongoing process of questioning, exploring, and challenging the assumptions that shape how we see the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, until next time, keep those minds buzzing.